Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Charles Rosin, also known as Chuck Rosin. I'll tell you all about Chuck in just a moment. Grace Under Pressure is that show that deals with what's too often dismissed as the soft stuff, the caring, the commitment we exert toward others. And when you do it from a leadership position, you do it to bring people together for common cause. And common cause is something that Chuck Rosin knows all about because he is an exceptional creator and a good friend of mine. So welcome, Chuck Rosin. So,
hi, John. How are you?
I'm doing great. I want to tell folks all about you. Chuck Rosin is an Emmy-nominated writer-producer for the television series Beverly Hills 90210, Northern Exposure, and Dawson's Creek. Chuck has taught writing and the art of pitching. I love that. Pitching a television series at both UCLA and USC. That's no mean trick to do both schools, as well as stand-up comedy for at-risk middle school kids. I've got to believe that was the toughest gig of all. And you're also, we're going to talk about this because I love it. Chuck is the creator of the Rosin Report, a monthly newsletter that offers readers an eclectic and personalized, somewhat nostalgic view of his home city of Los Angeles. Welcome, Chuck Rosin. So,
yes, a city you used to live in fact, just down the block from me.
We did, and that's where we connected because we had children almost the same age. My son was a few, 9 months older than your daughter. Am I correct? Something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, great. Anyway, let's dive in here. Storytelling is what you have made a living at because you're an award-winning screenwriter. So storytelling, and it's a key attribute in leadership. And many leaders that I work with at executive coaches, as an executive coach, and people in this audience are listening. But when you talk to people about telling stories, what do you tell them first, Chuck? So,
well, the cliche kind of a cliche that you tell a young writer or someone just starting out, not someone who has accomplished a lot and wants to tell a story, but someone who is trying to establish the credibility of being a storyteller. What you tell them is write what you know. And what you know doesn't have to just be what you know about a subject. In fact, you can learn real quick about a subject. But what's most important to know is who's your audience? Who are you writing for? You bring up this newsletter I'm doing, the Rosin Report, and it's Elsa. I'm going to be on this for a while. Can we not have it?
Sure.
Thank you.
That's nothing like live broadcast. It's here.
That's the only way to do that. That's exactly right. And we're in. I'm in my basement apartment here, a basement office here in Venice, California, and my status in the house is clear because I share it with the washing and dryer. So that's.
I love
it. But it is really knowing your audience, and so with the Rosin Report, I know that it's largely people our age, aging baby boomers who have time on their hands, and that's the key. There are many people I like. That I really don't send it to, that I really don't send it out to, because they don't have time. This is everything that I've written or do, pretty much, with the exception of some of the local political stuff, which I know we might get to by the end of the conversation. But everything that I done and how I perceive it is they're diversions. They're not that germane to the everyday course of living. They're not sometimes a story that I write, particularly stories that I used to write for film and television, especially when back in the day, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, even into the 90s, the form of the television movie, I kind of was a specialist in that kind of writing. Your audiences are targeted. My biggest hit, Beverly Hills 90210. It was known as a teen demographic hit. That's where it was. And that's when, at a time in the history of the broadcasting, when television started to move from a mass medium to a niche. And even with the Rosin Report, which somehow just keeps getting longer and longer, I keep people, cherry pick it. Just what you're interested in. If you like sports, if you like television industry, read that. If you're more a little highbrow, that may be my book report, or there are other things. Or many of the people who read it are like me, or at least get it sent to them, I should say. Grew up in Beverly Hills, California, at a certain time when it was really a wonderful place to grow up, and our public high school was flourishing. None of which you can say today, but and so they have that in common as well. So I think targeting is something that makes sense in terms of stories. It keeps you realistic, and keeps you humble, because the appreciation. I mean, you always. You have to appreciate that you have an audience. You have to appreciate that people buy your books, for instance. And I think that's something that, your listeners have in common with someone like John Grisham. I'm sure I've never met John Grisham, but I'm sure he enjoys meeting his fans, because they allow him to live the life he lives.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that sense of humility, and that's all the great entertainers, the truly great ones, are always in, awe or respectful of their audience, and they treat them like, thank you for coming out here. And
John, you don't know any professional comedians. You might know some who do comedy, but professional comedians are angry dudes, and now gals. And you see that. I just, in my last Rosin Report, I did a book report on, I was surprised, but I decided to read the latest book of Chelsea Handler. And it's because she was a Little League coach when I was the commissioner of girls softball in LA, and in West LA, where my daughters played. And she was really tough then, and she was not even a star. She was a kid. And you look at someone like that, and you realize, when I'm reading her book, gosh, this is really an angry, kind of shallow person. I don't even know if I'd ever want to meet her. The fact is, she's a good writer, and and is working on herself, which is a good thing. But at the same time, my dad, who was a doctor and a kind of a respectable citizen, made it really clear to his golf partners that he was never going to play another round of golf with Buddy Hackett, and if they wanted to play with him, because he was such a miserable person. Danny Thomas, a miserable. It's to say Jude notwithstanding, he did not like being around his fans. So humility is the people that we admire have humility, but there is that word, the persona. And entertainers and people who who receive public recognition, get that.
Well, since you mentioned your father, because you have told me so many stories, and we've known each other for over 40 years, and I have these Chuck Rosin thoughts that periodically surface whenever I hear of Los Angeles. There's always some Chuck Rosin that comes in. But I do remember your father was a gin rummy player, and he was a member of Hillcrest Country Club, and I think he played with some very famous comedians. Am I correct with that?
Yes, he did. All of that true. My dad was a doctor, and he was younger than many of the members in this country club. It's called Hillcrest Country Club. It was a something that is surprising to hear today, but was the way the world was. Is that when my father was younger than most of the members, and the reason there was a country club like that is because Los Angeles was a profoundly anti-Semitic city, but at about between, let's say, 1910 and into the end of World War II. And so the Jewish community built up its own counter institutions, a country club, a hospital, et cetera, funeral parlors, et cetera, et cetera. And but my dad was a little younger than he was. He was a very good doctor, pediatrician, became chief of staff of the largest hospital here in Los Angeles, and brokered the merger between Cedars-Sinai. But he just, he loved to gamble. He loved to play cards. And he knew that the comedians and the entertainment business was clubby. So he never tried to make them laugh. He never tried to tell them, this is my joke. Yeah. And so his favorite gin partner for years was Harpo Marx. And when my family moved,
did speak.
Well, yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah. He always carried a horn, but he spoke. No, he didn't always carry a horn. But when we moved to Beverly Hills in a house that my parents built up in the hills, our next door neighbor was Groucho Marx. And so Groucho, we moved into the house, it was our first Sunday in the house, and we were going to have a barbecue around the pool. And we had this new thing. It was 1958, and we had this new thing. There were speakers that you could hang outside, and they could play the music or the radio that was going on inside. And so this was brand new and very cool. And the part of the hills that we moved into was brand new. So we were about the sixth house up there. So there was very little. And my dad turns on the radio. And I'm in the back. I'm 6 years old. I'm trying to throw the basket in the basketball hoop. And Groucho Marx stands in the split level above us. And he goes, young man. And he's got a straw hat on and a bathing set, which his bathing suit and a little jacket. And his stomach completely exposed. And he goes, young man, please tell your father not everybody's interested in what Vin Scully has to say.
Oh, that's great.
And he was a prickly guy. Yeah. And yet, and I know there's one story you like about Groucho you mentioned, and I'll just pick up on that since this is storytelling is a part of a podcast about storytelling. My dad had just quit smoke. I was in college. I was a sophomore in Berkeley, and my dad had just quit smoking cigars, and it was around the holidays, and his patients used to give him presents, different things. And one patient knew he was a cigar smoker and gave them really fine cigars. I don't think they were Cubans, because we're already talking about 1972, but they were really a good box of cigars. And he said, why don't you take this up to call Groucho and take this up to Groucho? Because he wasn't feeling all that well at this point. It was probably, he had about 3, 4, 5 years left to live. But he was making the circuit at that point, being on the Dick Cavett show and different places like that. And he said, why don't you give him the cigars? And my roommate and high school friend, my roommate at Berkeley and my friend from high school, thought at that point he wanted to be a director, and saw himself as funny. And we would go see Marx Brothers movies and things like that would play on the college and at other screens. And we go to Groucho, and Groucho's, and what my dad told me is what Groucho's going to do, because he's a real cigar smoker. He's going to get the box, we schedule in the afternoon, get the box of cigars, and he immediately is going to open it up and light one up. And that's exactly what he does. And the entire time, my friend Steve, who has always had an inflated sense of himself, is constantly trying to make this person laugh, make Groucho laugh. and trying to be zany and talk about his movies. And Groucho, this kid's a pest.
Yeah.
Not the little boy who grew up next to me. And he said something, and he used like a modern word. He said like groovy in a sentence, and in a straight face. I said something along the lines of, well, whatever's, and just matter of factly, whatever's far out with you is out of sight with me, Groucho. And
good line.
And he laughed.
Ah,
It was the only time in that really awkward 20 minutes that my friend was trying to make him laugh that he laughed. And Groucho said, well, I can see you guys are much too smart for me. And so I'm going to go, and he retired out, and that was the end of that.
oh, that's a great story. I love that, and it gets around because I want to get back into the Rosin Report, but I want to preface it with I'm going to paraphrase it because I never get it exactly right, but Lincoln said, "I like to meet a man who's proud of his place, but even better, I like when the people of his place are proud of him." And I think the Rosin Report is definitely a reflection of that, because you are an aficionado, but you love your home city of LA, and you've taught me so much about the highways and byways of it that my mind is full of trivia anyway. But
it's getting harder and harder to love as it becomes less and less manageable. But it was there was a time, and it was, I think all of the state of California, and maybe this is a source of some of its problems, and Los Angeles as well, is that it was such a great place to live. It was, it kind of the essence, even though Porky and Bess is set in South Carolina, when she sings "Summertime and the Living is Easy," California's living was easy. We didn't have the snow. We did not have harsh weather. We didn't have mosquitoes. You could get anywhere in the city that you wanted to in 15 minutes. You could drive fast. People ask me all the time, what's the biggest difference between the LA I grew up in and the one that exists now? And, if you think of, my favorite rock and roll band, the Beach Boys, and you think that they sang about surfing. Well, they also, the early songs, they also sang about cars.
They did.
Because
and you did a television movie about them. So
yes, I did. And they, not a very good one, but if you ever want to see a really good movie about the Beach Boys story, or Brian Wilson's story, because his is by far the most interested, it's called Love and Mercy. It's with it's two parts of his life. Paul Dano plays him as a young man, and John Cusack plays him as an old man. It's a fabulous movie, especially for fans of the Beach Boys.
Right.
And it shows how he made his spectacular, groundbreaking album, Pet Sounds, is in the first part of it.
But it's funny. I play piano, and I sometimes try to play Beach Boys songs. And I was just thinking that the era that you grew up in Los Angeles had to be one of the most blessed times in American history, because just as you were describing, it was accessible. The weather was great. There was a booming economy, and this is superficial in a way, but
and it was geared to young people. It was a great place to be a kid, youth culture, all of that. And what I often think the beginning of the end occurred in the late 70s, when there became the inevitable backlash, and to the students of Berkeley, and the freedom and the hedonism of the time. And so one of the things that they wanted to do was the taxpayer revolt. We're not going to pay for all this. And in that time, they the state lessened its commitment to public education. in something where the city of Beverly Hills got sued because they were using property tax to pay for a heightened education that was not equal to what Los Angeles taxpayers were paying, et cetera, et cetera. That went in, and all of a sudden the commitment to education changed, the commitment to the quality of life here changed. And it was, so I do remember those times fondly. In fact, because of the Rosin Report, I'm being asked, you're my first kind of public engagement here, John, but my second one,
it is my honor.
Hard to believe that Beverly Hills has a Rotary Club, but it does. And they meet at the very posh Beverly Hills Hotel. And I will be there speaking. I'm their lunchtime speaker at one point. And you know, part of it will be to remember what it was like living in this community when I went to high school in the 60s and into the early 70s. And you know, that unfortunately things happened. Things started to change. You know, OJ jumped in the Bronco. Somebody figured out that there should be something called the internet, and the world changed. And it's not quite the same. One of the things in the Rosin Report that I do at the very end, I have different categories and subsections, and one of them near the end is called Confessions of a 20th Century Man. And you know, because that was my strong preference, was the idea I knew how to navigate in the 20th century. It was the 21st century where I started to try to get even into the tech business, which is a colossal failure on my part. But in the 60s, in the 20th century, what you did was, if you had a problem, was you picked up the phone and you called somebody. And if that didn't work, you got in the car and you drove somewhere and you went into the building and you talked to someone face to face. That's how things got accomplished. That's still how things got accomplished.
Well, yeah, it does
get accomplished. So, you know, so that was my time, but it wasn't. That's important.
Yeah. So
it was. LA was a great time to be in at that time, and always has. You know, I'm reading a book. One of the things for the Rosin Report I'm reading, I do book reviews. Mm-hmm. I put the golf poem book in a different category, so it wouldn't have to, you know, we talked about in the sports report, not in the book report. But as I said, when I was doing the Chelsea Handler one, and I'm doing one on the fabulous reading right now, getting to the end of it, on Lorne Michaels about Saturday Night Live. Yeah. The 500 pages of what, you know, he accomplished in that time, going through all the different permutations. And yet, and one of the things I can say, I got a chance to see Saturday Night Live once, when my lead of Beverly Hills 90210 and my friend Jason Priestley was the host. And Karen and I went back. This was in the early 90s, soon after you left LA. And I remember thinking, boy, when you're here, you're in the center of the universe. And that's kind of how LA used to feel. Especially when I was making 90210, because that's about when, I mean, you left about 1990, because that's the 90s was when LA started, the social problems started to become overwhelming, whether it was crack cocaine, whether it was traffic, whether it was overdevelopment, which you and I, well, the Rosin Report will be writing about that in October. You'll get your moment in the sun. That
now there's one thing, because we're racing, but there's one thing that has changed but not changed, and I always think of you, and that's the Dodgers are back up on top, and you took me to Dodger games, and you have a very special connection to the LA Dodgers that goes back to the the Brooklyn Dodgers. So tell us about that. So,
well, that's because my uncle Lou actually worked for a company called High Grade Meat Products as a salesman, and he sold the hot dogs to Ebbets Field. He moves to California. The Dodgers follow. he calls them up. The family gets great tickets, and we held those tickets from in Dodger Stadium started in 1962. We held those tickets from 1962 until I just couldn't stand what Frank McCourt was doing to the team, and we just gave it up.
Yeah.
Our owner. And it was really tough, John, because I used to sit at high school football games with him. I knew him very well because his son and my son played the same position on the varsity at Harvard Westlake. Yeah.
Well, anyway, now we got to jump in because we're running. As you know, I ask every guest a story about Grace. Do you have one that you want to share with us, Chuck? So,
well, I don't know if this is me behaving well under Grace. I don't know if it falls in the category, but I know that you had one with, you asked about a moment in show business was my favorite moment or something like that. So they may dovetail the same. It was about 1989, right before I started 90210. It was in the late 80s. And I had spent the decade writing television movies. And I was pretty successful at it. I had about 9 of them produced. But unless you watched television movies or knew they were coming on, chances are you never heard of any of these movies. And certainly wouldn't know me as the writer of them. You might know I did a movie that Jerry Lewis starred in, or I did a movie about the Beach Boys.
Yeah.
You wouldn't know the others. And it was starting to get a little frustrating when people would say to me, do you do TV movies? What movies do you do? And I'd list them off and they wouldn't hear any of them. I didn't want to do that anymore, especially I'm on a relatively short ski lift and we're going up and, I'm not going to spend my downtime saying it. So I asked the guy next to me, who was about 10 years younger than me. He was about my age, actually, come to think of it. Does he watch many TV movies? And he said no. But then he proceeded to say, but I did see one. And it turns out this guy and his wife had adopted children, and they were in a support group with other adoptive parents. And I had written a movie, one I actually won an award for. I'm looking at it up there in my wall, about an adoption that gets set aside, where the birth mother decides, I want this baby after all, and goes after it. And it was with the actress Lindsay Wagner. It was a very good actress whose name I forget right now, who was on the Facts of Life TV show. She played the daughter. It was a powerful movie. And he talked about how this group had seen this movie and discussed it, and it was very therapeutic for them. And I'm listening to him tell me this, and we get to the top of the lift, and I know it's my movie. I know it's the one I wrote. And you know what I said to him?
Tell me.
Have a nice run. Take care. There was no reason for me to have to tell him that I wrote that movie and I'm very important and very talented. He didn't need to know that. He needed to know that that an industry was out there doing something for him.
That's a great story.
When people ask me what's my favorite moment of all show business, it wasn't winning the People's Choice Awards or going to the Emmys or cashing the check. It was actually being on that chairlift.
What a beautiful story. I love that. Well, Chuck Rosin, we've known each other for a long, long time, and but we're coming to the end of this show. So with that, my friend, I would like to say goodbye and thank you.
Okay.